but I think we're trying to get it back, right? Whoever writes. So I have stories about domestic animals and wild animals and zoo animals and imaginary animals, animals that show up in our dreams. And this is a story that's really more about human beings than it is about an animal, but it's called Dog Tags. Clamp the S-hook to the collar, and the dog has permission to live. If he gets lost, the person who finds him can get your address and bring him home to you. If he gets hit by a car, someone will deliver a definition for the grief you feel at the loss of his company. Every year or two, you will renew his license, using pliers or a vice grip to detach the old tag and attach the new one. Then the dog will prance around the living room, shaking his head for a few moments, feeling the collar that he had forgotten he wears. You will hear him jingle in the house at night as he scratches his fleas, like he is your dog, though unlike this in that he takes no pleasure in their company. Because of the metallic jingle, you will hear him stir, turn, and resettle in the night. A stranger who once has been attacked, such a sweet dog, he would never, will be grateful for the music of dog tags that gives warning before the bark or growl or baring of teeth that will trigger the startle reflex, the body's memory of a trauma the mind has suppressed. Once a person has known teeth in her flesh, the dog tags will no longer convince her that anyone owns the dog's wildness except the dog. Domestic only means he has agreed to live in the house, and we have agreed to welcome him there. Men and women wear dog tags too, to identify their bodies. In 2001, a 27-year-old man traveling to Ho Chi Minh City to scout for business opportunities found the dog tags of American soldiers hanging on a string in a back alley market not frequented by tourists. They were for sale, 6 or 7 for $1. He was disgusted. He could not stop thinking about them. Were they real or fake? He returned to buy 620 of them and brought them home. Some of the dog tags belong to men who are still living. 30 years after leaving Vietnam, where every one of them must have left a piece of his soul, the soldiers got back their IDs. For them, too, the dog tags meant, in retrospect, permission to live. 30 years after their sons died in Vietnam, some parents got back their dog tags. One mother said she felt joy to hold them. For her, they meant identifying with her son's body, and he was real and tangible, at least in her mind, as had been the child whose back she had stroked as he fell into sleep on troubled nights. One morning in Vermont, when I lived simple and remote, visitors rare, and reminding me that the world extended beyond my house and barn and neighborhood, I picked up a hitchhiker. This was near the Canadian border, so near I had gone several times to a club the size of my living room in the eastern townships of Quebec to hear Jesse Winchester perform. The Memphis-raised folk singer and draft resistor had become famous for his love song, Yankee Lady, but he could not perform in the United States without being arrested for evading his 1967 draft notice. That war was everywhere in American society, and it showed up quietly on my dirt road that morning. The hitchhiker looked about the age I then was, 24 or 25. He was bearded, scruffy, and carried a dirty backpack, the sartorial style signifying, it seemed to me then, his solidarity with resisting the trim exterior that belied America's vicious heart. To be messy and grow wild was to be truthful about the reality that our nation was a mess and the war had gone wild, a ferocity no one's tidy rhetoric could control. But appearances rarely are what they seem, and I realized soon that I had projected my own ideology on the stranger. Instead of learning the story that had brought him to this spot on his tattered map, I realized soon I had projected my own ideology on the stranger, instead of learning the story that had brought him to this spot on his tattered map. I know this is beginning to sound like one of those tales we call a shaggy dog story. So much digression you can't see where you're going. I brought the man to my house for lunch, gave him homemade soup and bread. He wanted to lift a few miles down the road, and I agreed to take him. He pointed to the green area on his map, saying it looked like the biggest stretch of uninhabited forest in the vicinity, and asking me if that were true. I said yes, and pointed out the window to the cold Holler Mountains, which had been my comfort in the landscape that taught me I belonged to something larger and older and wiser than human life. He told me he wanted to see if he could survive in the wild with nothing but his pocket knife and sleeping bag. Did he even have a sleeping bag? I remember so little of this, only that I thought he was crazy or suicidal or running from something that must have seemed to him worse than death. It was late autumn, and in that region winter brought killing cold, weeks when the morning temperature would register at 40 below. Why didn't I ask the stranger where he had come from and why? Why didn't I offer him something other than soup and a ride? What would it have been? I was afraid of him, and I wanted to protect him, and the contradiction immobilized my good intentions. After lunch, I drove him as far as a car could go on the dirt road that dead ends on a saddle of those forested mountains. This looks good, he said. The maple trees had already begun to lose their leaves and lay crisp with frost on the hard-packed ground. I stopped the car. Are you sure? I began to see that I might be helping a man to kill himself. Yes, he said, and his eyes were sure. What was unsaid hung around us like acrid smoke. Will you do me a favor, he asked. What? He reached in his pocket and took out a set of dog tags hanging on their chain. Put these in the nearest U.S. mailbox. I stared at him. It's okay, he said. I took the tags. I let him out. He walked up slope into the woods. I wanted to call out to him, but what could I have said? I drove to town and put the dog tags in a mail drop in the post office. I felt as if I were committing a crime. I cannot say what his intentions were. Perhaps he'd gone AWOL and would hike north to the border for amnesty. Perhaps he died in the cold woods with not one thing on his body to identify him, wanting to be reduced to the animal because he felt himself no longer to be human. There were so many men, mostly men in those years, who were lost or could not find a way out of the arguments in their heads over what they had done or not done in the war. I felt ugly to myself, as if by handing in his tags, I was treating a man as if he meant less to me than a dog. I regret still that I did nothing more to help him. What would that have been? Send a letter to his family explaining his confident resolve? Perhaps this account is that letter. Perhaps we, every one of us who has no faith in war, are his family. So I think I'll skip to Los Angeles. I told myself for a while, I went to Africa, wrote about some animals in Africa. I wrote about animals in my backyard and in my house, but sometimes I was called to do something, or give a talk in a place where it might be hard to find an animal story, and I said to myself, I'm not going to take this engagement unless I can find one, and this was probably the hardest one to find in Los Angeles, but eventually I did find one. So this is called Hood River Oyster. I'm not sure when I began to notice the absence of birds. I come to Los Angeles for the weekend to speak about science and the Western American imagination. I lamented the split in science and religion that has widened since Darwin. I might have said that as an animist, I see nature as God. Or I might not have said this, because it would have made me feel undressed in public. God is like sex, best experienced with a very small audience, or none at all. A Native American man in the audience complained that we could not solve the problems of dominance and rank, and that we could not solve the problems in our relationship with nature until we solved the problems of dominance and rank. I said we followed the pathway of the chimp with chest-thumping, ground drumming, bullying, assault, and mutilation as very old habits in the primate line. That doesn't mean this is the only path we can follow through the genetic undergrowth. Bonobos, with whom we also share a common ancestor, resolve conflicts by diffusing hostility with affection and sexual play. They are mutualists. I am a psi-animist. I concluded the word bubbling up from nowhere, from the same old vine that split from the apes. I'm not sure when I began to notice the absence of birds, certainly not when I checked into the Los Angeles Biltmore, craning at the sky-high tropical fool-the-eye mural depicting split-leaf philodendrons and birds of paradise. Not when I walked up Bunker Hill to admire the glint and curve of Frank Gehry's Disney concert hall. But now that I think back, not a pigeon or sparrow bothered me for crumbs when I sat in the patio to enjoy my coffee and scone. Not a feathery rustling passed overhead when I walked back on the overpass, stopping to study the parking lot below. Movie paraphernalia had caught my eye. 4 silver Range Rovers, 8 black limos, coil after coil of electrical wire, rows of Klieg lights, tripod stands, first aid van, trailers for the stars to change their clothes, all lined up and waiting for action. Not a soul in sight. Later, at the Getty Museum, archaic leaf and shell prints marked the travertine, but not one dime-sized splatter of limey shit appeared anywhere on the billion-dollar campus. The LA Weekly offered discount coupons for removal of crow's feet. There had not even been any dogs. Unlike in Prague, where I'd seen a wolf on the tram, its off-duty muzzle hanging loosely like a necklace, or in New York City, where professional dog walkers gather a dozen clients from Upper West Side apartments, experienced urban dogs who can walk a mile held like a bouquet in the dog walker's hand and never tangle their leashes. In Los Angeles, I saw a brown bear on a billboard, California Bank promoting the animal that had been absent from the California landscape since 1922. The loss-made elegy versus Californicus became a state animal 30 years later in 1953. By this time, I was ravenous. I walked down Grand Avenue to the Water Grill, more empty limos waiting for more stars, a white Hummer long as a bus, 2 black stretched Lincolns. I cracked the restaurant's door, the place buzzing with celebrity and desire. I snaked through the crowd to sit at the bar, ordered a Grey Goose martini, and watched the barman open oysters with one flick of the knife. He knew how to keep everyone happy. Champagne for the fledgling lovers sitting beside me, though they were already blasted. The woman spinning on her bar stool as she laughed and flung her hair, as seductive as a pirouetting sandhill crane. Conversation for the middle-aged lesbians down the line who murmured like wood ducks floating on a calm sea. Benign neglect for the woman sitting alone, nursing her vodka and writing in a notebook. Chicken scratch made hastily in the semi-dark bar. The first time the woman hit me with her hair, I startled, as if she'd spilled my cocktail. Young, perhaps Indonesian, with curry-colored skin, dressed in saffron and coral brocade as tight as reptile skin, she was wrapped in the gaze of her companion. He was young, though older than the woman, skinny and white. His shirt was unbuttoned in that 70s way, nearly to his belly. I thought of Mark Wahlberg when he played porn star in Boogie Nights. His impressive, though pathetically fake member, which you only get to see at the very, very end. The woman had long, expensive hair, dyed in a weave of brunette, strawberry blonde, and platinum strands. It was thick hair and heavy with product. I began to think she aspired to the screen, and he was making promises. They fed oysters to each other, tipping the shells so that the milky flesh would slide through the portals of one another's lips. They twined forearms to sip champagne while staring into the oil wells of each other's eyes. It was a parody of love, a B-movie of love, a staged reading of love's stale and empty lines, big, fat oysters, narrow flutes of champagne. The more drunk they got, the more their outsized laughter spread like a toxic spill. The close-cropped women down the bar asked about the oysters. Are they farmed? The barman said, no, they're wild. Paused a beat. Well, they're grown on strings that hang in the ocean. I mean, they are in the ocean, so when you say farm, I think confined. I ordered the farm-raised sturgeon. Then the hair, again, whipped across my shoulder. The acolyte spinning away from her companion, flinging her hair, as in a commercial for shampoo, yet oblivious to anything except her arrows for the unbuttoned man. I said nothing except to myself, to whom I repeated, if she hits me one more time with her hair. And she did. After which, I again did nothing. But watch the oyster slide from the man's shell into her pretty pink mouth. The little sea thing released from its briny transsexual life. Down it went into her red throat, the creature whole and alive. Gills, gonads, three-chambered minuscule heart and lacy black mantle, a few grains of grit and nacre. It was like watching something I remembered from another life. Not the sex of it, but the animal appetite. Life taking life into its savoring throat. It was like watching myself swinging in the trees, flying through the clatter of monkeys, macaws, and operatic frogs. The old music of Earth, savage, joyful, and lost.